For nearly 1,400 years, the Catholic Church has maintained an iron rule. The Pope must be male, period. No exceptions, no women allowed in the highest office of Christendom. But what if that rule was broken? What if a woman actually became Pope and ruled the Church in complete secrecy for 2 years before the truth came out? And what if the Vatican has spent the last 800 years trying to erase her from history? Her name was Joan, Pope Joan, and the Church doesn't want you to know she existed. The official story: she's a myth, a legend, pure fiction invented by medieval monks to attack the papacy. The Vatican has spent centuries dismissing her. Scholars have debunked her. Historians have declared the whole thing impossible. But in 2018, archaeologists found something the Church couldn't ignore: medieval coins bearing her name and an image of a female pope. Coins that shouldn't exist if she was just a legend. The Vatican's response? Silence. This is the story of the one woman who supposedly sat on the throne of Peter, the woman whose existence the Church has tried to eliminate from the historical record, and the evidence that suggests they're lying. Before we go any deeper, I need you to answer this in the comments. Do you think the Vatican is hiding Pope Joan's existence, or is this just a medieval myth that got out of hand? And tell me your location and what time it is, because I want to know who's watching this and questioning what institutions choose to hide. Also, comment below, if Pope Joan was real, how does that change what you thought you knew about the Church? Part 1. The legend that refuses to die. The story is so scandalous, so dramatic, that it reads like fiction. But it's been told and retold for nearly 800 years, appearing in medieval chronicles, artistic representations, and the consciousness of medieval Europe. Here's the legend as it's been passed down. A brilliant woman is born in Mainz, Germany. Her parents migrate there from England. She's exceptional, gifted in languages, theology, and philosophy. But there's one problem. She's a woman in a world where education is for men only. So she does something radical. She disguises herself as a man and joins a monastery. She excels in her studies. She becomes so knowledgeable, so articulate, that nobody suspects her true identity. She rises through the ranks of the Church with stunning speed. Cardinal, respected theologian, political operative, and then, in 855 AD, she does the impossible. She's elected Pope. She takes the name John VIII. The Church has a new Pope, and nobody knows he's actually a she. For 2 years, she rules. She performs papal functions. She ordains priests. She makes theological pronouncements. She leads the Church, but she's also in love, and she's pregnant. The story says that during a papal procession from St. Peter's Basilica to the Lateran, one of the most important ceremonial events in the Church calendar, she goes into labour, in front of thousands of witnesses, in front of cardinals, in front of the entire Church hierarchy. She gives birth, right there, in the street, her true identity exposed in the most brutal public way possible. What happens next depends on which version of the legend you read. Some say she died in childbirth. Others say the crowd, furious at the deception, stoned her to death. Some accounts say she was dragged behind a horse and executed. One version claims her son became Bishop of Ostia. But all versions agree on one thing. After that day, the Church tried to erase her. Papal processions began avoiding the street where she gave birth, a road that came to be known as the Vicus Papissa, the street of the woman pope. For centuries, popes refused to travel that route. Even today, the longer path is still used. The architecture of Rome itself was shaped by the desire to forget her, and the Vatican declared her, and the entire idea of her, a lie. Part 2. The Church says it's fiction. For centuries, Pope Joan was accepted as historical fact. Medieval chronicles included her. The Council of Constance in 1415 discussed her as a real person. The Cathedral of Siena included a bust of her among the other papal portraits. Scholars wrote about her, artists painted her. But then something changed. In the 16th and 17th centuries, as historical criticism awakened in Europe, scholars began to question the story. How could this have happened? Where was the documentary evidence? Why were there no contemporary records? In 1647, a Protestant historian named David Blondel wrote what became the definitive debunking. He analysed the dates, the timelines, the documented papal succession. He proved that there was no gap. Pope Leo IV died in 855, and Benedict III was elected immediately after. There were only a few weeks between them. No room for a female pope. The chronology didn't work. The evidence didn't exist. The whole thing was impossible. So the Church did what it does best. It declared the story false and moved on. By the 18th century, Pope Joan was officially a myth, a legend, a cautionary tale invented by medieval monks to criticise the corruption of the papacy, nothing more. The Vatican built its entire defence on one argument. There is no evidence. Show us the proof, and we'll believe it. But there is no proof. Therefore, it never happened. For 350 years, this was the consensus. Pope Joan was fiction, case closed. But then, in 2018, something unexpected happened. An archaeologist in Australia found coins. Part 3. The coins that shouldn't exist. His name is Michael E. Habicht. He's an archaeologist at Flinders University in Adelaide, and he spent years analysing medieval coins from the 9th century, specifically coins from the period when Pope Joan supposedly reigned. These aren't ordinary coins, they're Frankish deniers from the 850s, and they bear something crucial, the portraits and names of emperors and popes. Medieval mints didn't put fictional people on coins. If your face was on a coin, you were real, you were important, you had power. Habicht and his colleague, graphoanalyst Marguerite Speicher, examined coins attributed to Pope John VIII, who officially reigned from 872 to 882. They compared the early coins from his reign with the later ones. What they found was shocking. The monograms were completely different. The earlier coins, dating from 856 to 858, right in the middle of Pope Joan's supposed reign, bore a monogram that was distinctly different from the later papal monograms. The handwriting was different. The artistic style was different. The signature itself was different. Habicht's theory: those early coins don't belong to Pope John VIII at all. They belong to someone else, someone whose name appears on the coins as Johannes Anglicus, John the Englishman. The exact name medieval chroniclers gave to Pope Joan. Habicht published his findings in 2018. He argued that the coins provided physical evidence that a female pope actually existed, that her reign was squeezed into the historical gap between official popes, that the Vatican didn't erase her from history. The Church itself acknowledged her by putting her image on coins, before later trying to hide the evidence. The implications were massive. If Habicht was right, Pope Joan wasn't a myth, she was real, and she was documented on the one medium that medieval kingdoms used to proclaim truth to their people: coins. The Vatican's response? Complete silence. Part 4. Why the Church needs to hide her. The question isn't really whether Pope Joan existed. The real question is, why has the Church worked so hard to make sure nobody believes she did? If Joan was real, it shatters the foundation of papal authority. Not because a woman was pope, though that's certainly uncomfortable for an institution built on male-only hierarchy, but because it proves the Church is willing to systematically erase inconvenient truths from the historical record. If the Vatican could hide a female pope, what else have they hidden? What other scandals, what other secrets have been buried in Vatican vaults and struck from official chronicles? The Church's authority rests on the idea that it's guided by God, that the Pope is infallible, that the institution is trustworthy and transparent. A female Pope doesn't just contradict those claims, it destroys them. It proves the Church is run by humans, fallible humans, humans willing to rewrite history to protect their power. But there's more to it than that. Medieval chroniclers who documented Pope Joan weren't hostile to the Church. They were monks, friars, church officials. They were writing from within the institution. The first detailed account comes from Jean de Mailly, a Dominican friar around 1250. Later, Martin of Troppo, another Dominican who worked at the papal court itself, included the story in his chronicle of popes and emperors. These weren't enemies of the church trying to damage it. These were church insiders describing something they believed had actually happened. The legend spread because it felt true. It felt like something the church would do: hide a scandal, rewrite history, protect institutional reputation above all else. And the church knew that if the story gained too much credibility, it would be catastrophic. So they did what they always do. They declared it a myth. They dismissed it as propaganda. They used their authority to tell people what to believe, and for 350 years it worked, until archaeologists found coins bearing her name. Part 5. Why historians still don't believe. Here's where it gets complicated. Because even with the coins, most scholars remain unconvinced. The problem is that Habic's evidence is circumstantial. A different monogram on coins doesn't prove a woman was pope. It could prove a different male pope. It could prove a transcription error. It could prove nothing at all. The Vatican and mainstream historians argue that the coins could easily have been fabricated. During the height of the Pope, Joan Legend's popularity, fake relics were big business. Monks and merchants created false artifacts to sell to believers. Maybe these coins were created to support the myth, not as evidence for its truth. Additionally, the documentary evidence is overwhelming that Pope Joan didn't exist. There are detailed papal records from the 850s. They show a clear succession. There's no gap. There's no room for a female pope, no matter how hard you try to make the timeline work. The Church's position is ironclad. Prove she existed with contemporary evidence and we'll acknowledge it, but there is no contemporary evidence. Therefore it didn't happen. And they're right. From a purely historical standpoint, the evidence against Pope Joan is stronger than the evidence for her, but that's exactly what makes this story so powerful, because the Church's argument relies on one thing: the absence of evidence. But absence of evidence isn't the same as evidence of absence. If the Church wanted to hide a female pope, the first thing they would do is remove her from official records, destroy the documentation, strike her name from the chronicles, make it so there's no contemporary evidence that she ever existed. The very thing historians cite as proof she wasn't real is exactly what you would expect if the Church had successfully covered her up. Part 6. The Erasure. This is what historians call the Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory. It's a punishment with ancient roots, dating back to the Roman Empire. When someone was condemned to damnatio, their name was erased. Their images were destroyed. Their existence was struck from the record. It was as if they had never lived. If the Vatican wanted to erase Pope Joan, this is exactly what they would do. They would declare her a myth. They would dismiss the story as legend. They would remove any references to her from official papal lists. They would claim the documents that mentioned her were forgeries or exaggerations, and they would do this so effectively that by the time modern scholars came along, the absence of evidence would seem like proof that she never existed. Think about what we know about other erased figures in history, about women whose contributions were stripped from the record, about inconvenient facts the powerful wanted forgotten. The difference with Pope Joan is that she's so famous, so legendary, that the Church can never fully erase her. Every century the story resurfaces. Every few decades someone finds a new proof that she was real. The 2018 coins are just the latest. There have been others. In the 1990s, researchers pointed to architectural oddities in Rome that seemed to support elements of the legend. In the 1980s, scholars argued that certain papal documents had been deliberately altered or removed. The Church's response is always the same: myth, legend, fiction. Nothing more. But the fact that the Church has to keep denying it suggests something. If Pope Joan was obviously fake, why does the Vatican still feel the need to defend against the claim? Why does it still matter? Because if Pope Joan was real, everything changes. Part 7. What if she was real? Imagine for a moment that the archaeologists are right. Imagine that Pope Joan did exist, that she ruled the Church, that she was erased from history. What would that mean? First, it would mean the Church is not infallible. It's not guided by divine providence. It's an institution run by human beings willing to rewrite history to protect their power. Second, It would mean that women have been systematically excluded from power not because God demanded it, but because the Church chose it. And that choice is arbitrary, it's human, it's political. Third, it would shatter the Church's claim to absolute truth. If they lied about Pope Joan, what else have they lied about? What other inconvenient facts have been buried in Vatican archives? What other scandals have been covered up? The Church's entire authority structure rests on its claim to moral and spiritual truth. Once you introduce the idea that the Church is willing to systematically erase history, that foundation cracks. And that's precisely why the Vatican cannot afford to admit that Pope Joan might have been real. Because if they do, the questions don't stop, the inquiries multiply, the walls of the Vatican become permeable to scrutiny. The Church would rather condemn an entire woman to historical oblivion than risk that kind of institutional vulnerability. The legend lives. Pope Joan has appeared in art, literature and popular culture for 800 years. She's been depicted in paintings and sculptures. She appeared in the Cathedral of Siena until the Vatican demanded her removal. She's been the subject of novels, films and scholarly debates. She's a symbol, a myth, a possibility. Whether she was real or not, Pope Joan represents something the Church cannot tolerate. The idea that its authority is not absolute, that its history can be questioned, that its rules are not divinely ordained but politically constructed. The Church built an empire on unquestioned obedience, on accepting what it says without verification, on trusting that the institution knows what's best. Pope Joan is a threat to all of that, because her legend proves that the Church can hide things, that it can rewrite history, that it cannot be trusted completely. The coins found in 2018 may or may not prove she existed. The historical evidence may remain inconclusive forever. But that almost doesn't matter, because Pope Joan has already won. She lives in the imagination of millions. She represents the possibility of a different church, a more inclusive church, a church that doesn't erase women from history. The Vatican can deny her existence forever, but as long as people keep asking the question, as long as archaeologists keep searching for evidence, as long as the legend survives, Pope Joan will haunt the Church. And in a way, that's the most powerful legacy any erased woman could have. To refuse to be forgotten, to insist on being real, even when the most powerful institution on earth says you're a myth. To be a name on ancient coins, a question mark in the historical record. A woman who may have ruled the Church and then disappeared, deliberately erased by the very institution she led. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe. History is written by the winners, but sometimes the erased win too. Thanks for watching.